everybody, for joining another My Two Cents. I have Kelly Boykin here. We are in our fourth segment about how to win in the MSP VMS arena. And we're now, now that we've decided we want to jump 2 feet into the MSP world, we've talked a little bit about some of the obstacles and challenges of being a new supplier in our program. We've talked about some of the mistakes that either we or our organizations, or we've seen those make, in trying to be a successful supplier into an MSP program. So now let's make a stew, Kelly, and let's really talk about the recipes for success in an MSP program. So what really stands out to you are some of the core success pillars in being not only a good supplier, but a great supplier?
Now you're making me hungry, by the way, because now I just want stew.
It is lunchtime.
Yeah. Yes, exactly. I think when we think about the elements that come together, the obvious things that you think of are performance, right? If you're in a program, you need to be delivering, and you need to be delivering successfully if you want to stay. And that really becomes table stakes, right? That is one of the most important things that we can do. But beyond that, the things to think about are, how are we adding value to this program in a way that allows us to stand out and be different? There are 25,000 staffing firms in North America. There are probably hundreds of suppliers in some of these large programs in different categories. How do you stand out? Yes, that's going to be by delivering, but it's also going to be by having a really strong relationship with the program, understanding what's important to them, understanding what it is they're trying to achieve for the customer, helping them identify and drive spend through the program, bringing them market intel. So things that you can do to differentiate yourself and add value beyond putting great talent into the program are things that I think are going to be those fundamental keys to our stew.
Yeah. And how do you see firms structuring their MSP deliveries really to scale and not just support, say, one or two MSP programs, but maybe a significant amount of programs that they're starting to see initial success?
Yeah, you really need a strategy for this. And we've said before, it's going to be a different strategy than it is for your retail business. What I like to see is where we've gotten it broken down and we're thinking about how delivery should happen onshore, offshore, where AI and automation need to come into play. And that might be different for different client groupings. You might have customers that are either in a certain geography or different skill sets or different size or value, strategic value to the organization. You may have them delivered slightly differently than other customers, but having a real strategic approach to how we want to approach this. Again, how do we want our offshore partners? Where do we want them to engage? Where don't we want them to engage? What do we expect of our onshore recruiters? So having, I know it sounds very basic, but having a really defined, thoughtful strategy in place for how you want to deliver to this ahead of time. Because if you're making those decisions at the time of rec release, you're too late. And and it happens a lot.
Well, it does, right? In that case, you've already lost in many cases. What we find with our customer base is really having that daily VMS hygiene and focus, in having stand-up meetings, really going through. We used to go through every single rec that was open, and not only what needed to deliver from an initial candidate, but how many slots were available. We're seeing that shift now. It's not just about response time and getting that first submission. It's which suppliers are actively submitting candidates across all opportunities. And so, that consistent focus and engagement is critical. I think too, it's really making sure that we're structuring the teams that they can be working in almost a 24/7 capacity. We see a lot of clients leverage offshore teams to be building pipelines or engaging with talent or leveraging AI to be continuously screening candidates proactively or getting a jump perhaps compared to competition. And then when the recruiters get in, they've already got candidates slated for interview or can then pick the most viable candidates, to submit quickly. So it's precision submission rather than just, throwing anything against the wall that is really a differentiator in the market.
Absolutely.
I'm curious on just how you see utilizing data to be a very effective tool and not only being just a middle tier supplier, but truly being a supplier of choice.
Yeah. Yeah. Everybody's ATS is a little bit different, and some give better reporting than others. But the VMS itself does give us the opportunity to really look at some of the most critical data that we need. And that's going to be, what is your response rate? How many of these recs are you covering? You should be based on most MSP SLAs, you should be responding to at least 90% of the recs. How deep are you going? How many submittals per job order are you averaging? How many submittals does it take to get an interview? Like, that to me is one of the most important ones, because that interview is sort of that Moneyball metric in all of this. Once your candidate is in front of the hiring manager, we've got a much easier way of understanding where we went wrong if we don't get that filled. So submittal to interview to offer, all of those metrics are really important. And they're not just important so that we know them, but when you are using them diagnostically to help identify where there's a problem and zone in on how do we now solve this particular problem, that's where it's the most valuable to you. And I see a lot of companies that just either don't have the right access to it, or they're not using it in that diagnostic fashion. They're using it sort of after the fact as a report card, rather than to help them drive future performance.
But, and I think it's also a great tool to actually bring some of that diagnostic, data to, the MSP provider, or the client directly. And I think showcasing, here's, if we're seeing a really strong interview rate, but it's not translating to offers, really understanding why is that? Is there something that we're not doing to prepare the candidates? Are we doing a good keyword search, but the environments, may be a little bit different? Or, what are other suppliers doing that they see as being very successful? So I think it also, brings more insight to the table and allows for that strategic discussion, rather than just here's rec, fill rec, move on to the next. So I think using that data to tell stories, but also ask great questions, is critical.
Absolutely.
Very good. Well, thank you again so much, Kelly. Really appreciate learning more about what goes into that stew to being a great MSP supplier, and really being that top, quartile rather than middle of the road, because nobody wants that. So I look forward to our final session, where we're going to really put it all together. And now that we're a succeeding MSP supplier, really talk about how we can move from just being that vendor in a supplier, commoditized environment, to truly being a solver of workforce challenges. So till then, look forward to that discussion.